Fantastic, everyone. Welcome to this Nexus Gain talk. My name is Fabrice de Klerk. I'm the science director at EAT and also a principal scientist with the Alliance of Biodiversity and CGIAR of the CGIAR. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us today. We're going to spend the next hour talking about country-driven pathways to achieve global goals. We have some fantastic members of our FABLE collaboration here with us today. Aline Mosnier, the director of the FABLE project, FABLE standing for Food, Agriculture, Biodiversity, Land, and Energy, and representatives of 3 of the countries that are working on this project with us. Charlotte Gonzalez-Abraham from FABLE Mexico, Ranjan Ghosh from FABLE India, and then Jean Chavarro from FABLE Colombia. The FABLE project is one that I spend quite a bit of time on, but really one of my favorite endeavors. Quite a bit of our work is focused on trying to understand how do we achieve healthy diets within planetary boundaries at a global scale. Quite often, this leads to big numbers and big, I think, discussions on change, but it misses, I think, on the opportunity and recognition that even though we're all chasing after global goals in terms of human health, dietary health, and environmental stability, that there's a diversity of national pathways that are available that allow us to get there. So the FABLE project, I think, is a critical contribution that uses a country-driven approach, a very participatory country-driven approach to allow countries to explore what would be appropriate pathways looking across the food, agriculture, and environment nexus, so very much a nexus project, to try to identify what are plausible national pathways, understand whether some of those impacts lead to global goals, and through an important process of iteration that Aline will speak to, enable countries to refine those pathways to either increase, reduce ambition across different goals with the aim, again, of being able to foster international collaboration towards that progress. An important element of the work that we're just beginning to dive into is using the results and the interactions of the FABLE team to really foster a more evidence-based science policy dialogue, and also science policy dialogue that focuses on national capacities and needs. So with that, without further ado, we'll have Aline Mosnier give a quick introduction to the FABLE project. We'll then have presentations by each of the 3 country teams, and I hope leaving ample space for some conversation discussions with all of you. So thanks again for participating, and Aline, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fabrice. Can you see my slides? Yes, okay. So hi, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much for hosting us today. So I will briefly introduce the FABLE approach, even though already Fabrice, I think, introduced some key elements. So what we like now to say is that FABLE is a decentralized approach to model the national and global food and land use systems. And so how do we do that is we have built a consortium since 2017 that includes researchers. So we also call country teams, but in fact, it's not really official country teams, but really independent researchers based in national knowledge institutes who are interested to work together to build these decision support tools to guide action decisions in their countries towards more sustainable food and land use systems. So currently we have 23 countries represented, with Greece who joined just recently. And also an important aspect is that it includes countries a bit from all continents, so we have to reflect really a bit the diversity of our food systems and the problem that can be related to food and land systems. Maybe one particularity also is that we are trying to develop these tools together, be as open and transparent as possible, also try to make them as simple as possible, because I think the observation was that it was quite critical to have local researchers to build these pathways, to really have the strongest interactions with the other stakeholders and the rest of the society on this type of exercise. And also because these tools were not really available, and especially to look at multiple objectives and multiple targets together, these were not really available in many countries. So this is also a bit what inspired us. Just an illustration of the diversity, I think, a bit of our food systems, and I think that this is quite important to start with. Here is just about the current food patterns, and already here we can see a great variety. across the world. And of course, this then has some impacts on the landscape, on the nature, and our ability to meet our sustainable goals. So what we did also with FABLE is to build this approach or this method that we call scenathon. So this is an iterative approach to really try to integrate the national and the global scales. So all the time, it's really a bottom-up approach. So where we start from the country teams really independently, together with their stakeholders, developing their pathways and their assumptions and refining the tools. But then at some point, we aggregate all that to the global level, so also that we can see the impacts of trade and also the need to balance trade and see also how this affects the national pathways and the national goals. And also at the end, what we want is really to see if together, collectively, this can lead to the achievement of our global sustainable goals. So indeed, this is important, I think, to really empower people in the national context, but also this interconnectedness between the different countries is really something that is often not easy to understand. So having more exercise and this type of tools to show that, I think, is also an important driver to foster collaboration across countries. So this year we will do our Scenathon 2023. So this exercise, we try to run it not every year, but frequently. And what is really like the motivation for that is that all the time we try also to refine our tools and our approach. We also have new evidence also to guide the estimation of our global targets, global sustainable targets on these multiple dimensions: biodiversity, water, climate, food security. And then the policy context also is changing in the countries. So what we are going to try this year is to look at maybe 3 alternative pathways. What if, so it's always the starting point, what if we continue with the current trends, with the current policies in place, with the current level of enforcement? Where will this bring us in 2050? And then how far we will be to achieve our targets, both at the national level and at the global level. Then also we would like to see a bit or to illustrate what if countries achieve their national commitments, their national targets, and what will be then the impact on the global sustainability targets. But this already is a challenging task because it's really about translating also a lot of these commitments into precise quantitative targets so that we can monitor them in our models. And this is already quite a challenge. But an interesting challenge, I think, and the interesting discussions then with stakeholders related to that. And then after, the global sustainability pathway is really like when all countries together we really try to achieve our global sustainability goals, and we put all the actions in place to do that. And then, of course, like in different contexts, the differentiation between these 3 scenarios might be smaller or bigger, with very ambitious countries already in their national commitments, or less ambitious with then higher gap between the global sustainability and national targets. So this is really something that we are really starting to start this year. We are in the process. There will be a stakeholder, also public online stakeholder engagement around that. So we are really curious to hear also from more people about what they think about these assumptions, and to refine that and get some results by the end of the year. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Eleni. If any questions about the consortium, do pop those in the Q&A using the button at the bottom of the screen. Let's move on now to the Mexico project. So Charlotte, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fabrice. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Please let me know what is that you see. If you see my notes, let me know.
We see your notes. We see, yeah, go ahead and swap displays and you're all good, Charlotte.
All right, perfect. So good morning or good afternoon or good night. It depends where you are in the world. My name is Charlotte Gonzalez Abraham. I'm going to present what we are doing in FABLE Mexico. First, I would like to present the members of the Mexican FABLE team. They are all from different Mexican institutions and one US university and research institutions. Some of them have had experience working as government officials or advisors in the FABLE sectors in Mexico and Latin America, in the case of our colleague in the US. A quick country assessment. Mexico is a mega diverse country, cultural and biological speaking. 2/3 of the country are drylands, and that limits our ability to produce food in most of those areas. However, there are pockets of highly productive agriculture that relies on underground water storage that takes millennia to replenish. Irrigation agriculture is practiced here in those very arid areas where sun radiation and evapotranspiration is very high, depleting and salinizing soils really fast. Most of the country's dryland have been used for cattle ranching for centuries, and many of them have suffered intense biological changes as a result. At least 6 out of 30 million hectares of agricultural area are in dire need of restoration. In 2018, the national mean yield of the most important crop in Mexico, maize, was 3.2 tons per hectare. On the health side, 7 in 10 people are obese or overweight. At least 27 of preschool children present micronutrient deficiency. The population diet in our country have been evolving rapidly due to higher incomes and rapid urbanization. Among other changes, consumption of animal source food has increased, further intensifying the pressure on Mexico's agricultural systems and ecosystems. There are challenges on ensuing consistency on public policy, because every time that the political term finishes and there's a new change in government, there is also not always the public policy follows what we're doing in the previous term. There's also difficulty to coordinate vertically from federation to states to municipalities, as well as horizontally between ministries. Our largest market for fresh produce is the US and Canada. As we can see, we have a little bit of a problem, but it's not an environmental or dietary issue. It's not a problem only on increasing our yields. It's a multi-sectoral problem. It's a complex and cross-sectoral problem. These problems have been long recognized by past and current governments. However, solutions have been implemented disconnected from all the other sectors and from the academia. For example, land and food systems have looked traditionally on solutions to improve land productivity, given the demand of current dietary preferences, but not in combination with the promotion of healthy diet changes that will reduce the burden on public health institutions. In 2018, the federal government, understanding the challenge, created a new intersecretarial group to transform the Mexican land and food systems to be a just, healthy, and sustainable. The name of this group is HISAMAC, an integrated ministry, and among others, health, environment, agriculture, and economy. Its intent is to promote, among other strategies, a healthy and sustainable diet and implement agricultural practices that would reduce the effects of agriculture on the environment. It will increase the yields and feed a growing population in the country. In terms of agricultural practices, the focus has mainly been on agroecological solutions. The FABLE strategy are the creation of pathways that can show the effects of combined public policies across the land and food system. A pathway is a combination of scenarios, and these scenarios represent or they are the translation of public policy into parameters that can be tested in the calculator. In the case of Mexico, we focus on the current policy and international commitments. Mexico already has many of its internal goals and international commitments aligned with what we call global targets. What we are trying to do is to try to identify what are the trade-offs of implementing those that public policy and international commitments. How much would they contribute to our national well-being and in the global goals? In here, I show you an example of the pathways created to show the effects of different policies. We have the current trends, which it will be what will happen if we do nothing and we keep going as we have been doing, without integrating some of the public policies that are already in paper, but probably not being implemented. And then in the sustainable pathway, we try to show the effects of implementing that public policy and international commitments that might not be being implemented at national level, but there is a potential to be implemented given our national reality. As a brief example of the potential of this modeling framework in Mexico, I'm showing you the effects of the two different pathways that I showed you before, and what happened on calorie production, food production, and the land cover evolution. The first thing that we ask when we create these pathways is that we have the results of our modeling, and then we ask, do we have enough food for the Mexican population? If we have enough food for the Mexican population, then the next questions are, for example, what is the evolution of the land cover given these changes, given the implementation of these policies? What are the resulting GHG emission? How much have we contributed to the shared global goals? With this in mind, then we are able to engage with the stakeholder engagement, with the stakeholders, and then we ask them what they think about our work. We show them the calculator and we work with them. So the idea is that this is an iterative process and working with the stakeholder engagement. We work mainly with institutions that are in charge of implementing public policy related to food and food systems. Part of our goals as a FABLE Mexico is to make sure that we reach the right people who are making decisions and implementing policies. And we consider this work with the stakeholders very important. We create the scenarios, or we are trying to create the scenarios with the stakeholders, and we are inputting policies that are relevant for them. Working with them, it helps us to ground through the scenarios that we are working. Some of them have been worked at the global level with our colleagues, with Aline and our colleagues. But also working with the stakeholders incorporates their expert knowledge. At the same time, once that we have finished with one of the runs of the model, then we can deliver the results to important parties, and they can be used for decision making. FABLE also has proven to be a powerful platform for stakeholder engagement, but promoting dialogue among sectors and facilitating discussion across diverse stakeholder groups between ministries and vertically from federal, state, and municipalities. It fosters the generation of innovative ideas for shaping future land use scenarios at all levels, and it offers an opportunity to explore what-if situations, what happens when you integrate, for example, several policies at different levels. We are collaborating with two federal institutions that are responsible of implementing and creating public policy in the land and food systems. We work with the National Institute of Public Health, and we define and integrated the mean current diets for the Mexican population using SANUD, which is a national survey, where they identify what people are eating and how much are they spending. We also integrated a Mexican adaptation of the Eat Lancet diet. What is very important is that this adaptation was not done by me, for example, that I don't know anything about diets, but it was done by this institution. This adaptation is a healthy, a sustainable, and most importantly, is culturally accepted and adapted to Mexican preferences. With the Ministry of Agriculture, we started a process of training them for the use of the model. So we eventually will deliver the model to them. But this model will be delivered once it has been Mexicanized. That means that we are using data that is considered for official data. In that way, it can be used to make decisions. Otherwise, data from FAO or from other databases, global database, is not considered official and cannot be used. We are in the process of integrating new scenarios based on pilot programs. Some of the programs that we are working with to integrate it into the calculator are being developed by the Agricultural Ministry, and then they are part of the objectives to transform the land and food systems. So far, there is a lack of evidence of the success of these initiatives and its potential scalability. However, the work is being done and its results will be publicly available. At this time, the challenge is the translation of the respective results into the calculator so we can model them. In many cases, the expected results or what they are measuring is how many people is going to be benefited or how many dollars are going to be spent on each one of these people. There are other federal policies that we want to integrate. Some of these policies are being already implemented or trying to be implemented. For some of them, we don't have enough information to be able to translate them into the calculator. For example, we will need to know what are the yields in Mexico for the 5 most important crops if there is no use of glyphosate. What are the alternatives of this use and the resulting yields? There are pilot programs that are investigating these alternatives, but so far the results are not publicly available. In the moment that they are publicly available, then we will be able to integrate them into the calculator. In the case of agroecological practices, we have published reports and papers of their effectiveness in some areas in Mexico, but there's still a lack of evidence of its scalability. What we intend to do is to create pathways that represent the effect of all these policies on national level, and this will allow us to be able to identify major imbalances and potential threats to national food and land use systems. With this, I thank you. I'm sorry I took a minute and a half more. If you have any questions, I hope there is time.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And please do put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to hold them for the dialogue at the end of all 3 presentations. Let's move now over to India, and Ranjan, we give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Fabrice. I will try to do my presentation. Oh, yeah. So, can you hear me? Can you see the presentation?
Yep, excellent.
Yeah. Okay, good. So, thank you very much, Fabrice. Thank you, Aline, for your introduction to the whole FABLE work and giving a preview to the scenario in the marathons we're doing. I'm going to talk a little bit about why India is important and why this work is important for India, and then move to what exactly we're trying to do in this round of the scenathons in India. So all of you probably know India is a large country with a very complex demographic, socio-demographic situation, and it is highly dependent on agriculture for lots of things. For feeding the population, a large proportion of Indian population is engaged in agricultural activities, while productivity and contribution to GDP is not very high. It's also very important for feeding the livestock. On the other hand, there are issues in terms of nutritional requirements for the Indian population. So while we may be inching towards food security, we're very far from nutritional security. For example, 14.5% of India's population is undernourished. There are high rates of stunting, preschoolers and underweight, close to 23%, and healthy diets which are required in order to solve some of these problems are either not accessible, or if they're accessible, they are quite expensive. So there is a question of affordability. The agri sector in India is also, one of the, large emitters of greenhouse gas emissions, and probably the largest, not probably, but certainly the largest consumer of water resource. So close to 80% of fresh water in the country is used by agriculture, and most of that are consumed by the 2 most popular cereal crops, that is rice and wheat. So there is, why we're talking about this is because there is a strong interlinkage between how food is produced, the requirements of food consumption, the demand, the production system, the impacts and the externalities generated out of that, which go over to health, nutrition, which have links to energy. So all of this, and of course the environmental impacts, there is a nexus. There is a very strong trade-offs between these. The way food is produced, the way food is consumed, the impacts, and the health aspects of that. So how do we take an integrated view is where the real challenge lies. How do we integrate this? At the policy level, integration is now becoming at least it's now being talked about, but in reality, there's still work in silos. So the policies are designed, and we'll take a couple of examples as we move forward. The policies are designed in silos. They are, so the agricultural ministry, it works with its own mandate. The energy ministry works on its own mandate. The climate change, forestry, environment ministry, they work on their own mandates. There is hardly any communication. What we call as convergence, or what we look for as convergence, is far from how it operates in reality. So how can we? One of the reasons why probably this is the case is because we don't have enough scientific knowledge or evidence-based scientific policy, which means a lot of research which is supposed to happen not in silos but integrated is missing. And that is where the FABLE Consortium comes in, and it takes an important, ambitious approach to trying to feed that gap and fill that gap by producing integrated assessments, where at one platform, at one place, we can get some results which are helpful to the policymakers, to people who matter, in an integrated fashion. So therefore, we use these technical tools. I won't go into the details of this. Aline has already talked about that. And we also, after the scientific knowledge is produced, we also try to do stakeholder engagement. As Charlotte talked about in Mexico, we have tried to use a platform called Flagship, where we are trying to disseminate the knowledge we produce to different stakeholders, which include research institutions, which include think tanks, but most importantly, the national and state level policymakers. I'll probably talk a little bit about that. But before that, I would like to introduce my team, which you can see on the right side. We are hosted at the Indian Institute of Management, which is in Ahmedabad. It's one of the leading management schools in India, where we have a very strong focus on understanding the dynamics in the agricultural sector, in the rural sector, and in environment and climate change. So, the team comprises of Chandan, Vartika, Prantika, Ankit, Aditi. Okay, so just to give a quick view, we have started, some publications based on last, few years of work, which you can access through our websites. So as I said, this is a nexus which is extremely important because there are severe trade-offs in this. So how are we trying to produce knowledge or information which can identify these trade-offs at one place? Is through the FABLE Calculator, the FABLE scenathon process, which Aline already talked about. So she talked about the 3 scenarios we are going to look at in terms of the current trends, national commitments, and global sustainability. I'll focus here on a little bit, very quickly, talk about why national commitments and looking at a national level scenario is very important and interesting. Although we have already had a couple of rounds of scenathon, they were mostly to tune the model to actually start talking, setting the language, and we had fantastic results with so many countries coming together and trying to harmonize our data and look at how we can jointly achieve global goals. But as Aline rightly said, that cannot be let's say ignoring the national level policy realities, right, for every country. So what are the national level policy realities which we need to be cognizant about and need to include in our models is what we are trying to do in this particular round. So, for example, if you look at the food demand scenarios, we have been working with Eat Lancet recommendations, but they're costly to start with. And if we want to implement Eat Lancet recommendations in India, we will face issues in terms of the rural population and a large chunk of population not being able to afford, for example, a diet which is high on fruits and vegetables. Whereas on the other hand, dairy and milk consumption is extremely important part of traditional Indian diets, and they are affordable to the general population. So what we are trying to do in this round, for example, is adopt the Indian Council of Medical Research, National Institute of Nutrition, this NIN diets. They have certain recommendations based on the local dietary preferences, local dietary realities. So we are trying to implement that and look at the impacts and look at whether those policies those pathways can be achieved or how far we are from that. And of course, then we compare with the current trends and we compare with the global sustainability targets, which are, of course, 8 lakhs hectares. Similarly, on food waste, we are, while 20% is what are the global targets, we are trying to be more realistic in terms of how the local realities, and we are taking a 10% reduction. We are looking at high exports in the future. We are trying to reduce our imports in the future. So we feed all of this in the model. Now, livestock productivity becomes very important because if we want to feed our population and ensure that the dietary requirements and the dairy or the milk requirements, related requirements are met, then that has to be met with livestock, enhancing livestock productivity. So that, of course, becomes very important. Just give me a second. Yeah. Similarly, crop productivity. How do we, increase crop productivity through, enhanced fertilizer use, through enhanced sustainable agriculture? Those are the things we are trying to include. So we are not assuming, expecting or incorporating land expansion, because that is absolutely critical to maintain the balance and not, expand agricultural land. That's why deepening our crop and livestock productivity becomes very important. We, include our bond challenge targets, which we are already exceeding, doing well on that. We increase the harvest intensity. We assume, climate change scenarios, which are achievable, which are, compatible with what the Indian policy making or the Indian stand is, which is close to 2 degrees. On the expansion of protected areas, we try to take slightly more, reasonable targets as compared to the global targets. So we try to take 10% increase. On biofuels, we are trying to include the new biofuel policy, which is basically trying to increase the blend of ethanol in petrol to 20% by 25-26, not 2030, but even earlier than that, so that the blending rates of what the government is trying to push for, we are trying to incorporate in the model to see whether we can achieve that, or what are the gaps, or what are the challenges around it. Similarly, we are trying to take an average increase in the agricultural cost. So, couple of minutes more before I end. So these are the drivers, for the population and GDP are the drivers. We all know food and nutrition security, in terms of the policy aspects, is extremely important. Therefore, we are trying to, work around and look how the local policy, right? For example, we have the National Food Security Act or the Integrated Child Development Services, which basically mean that how can we increase the nutritional intake and adequacy for children, for lactating mothers, or adults, for all categories, and how can we have more realistic targets around that? How can we achieve that? Similarly, on climate mitigation, for example, the National Biofuel Policy is a very classic example of how these trade-offs operate. So on one hand, we have a biofuel policy which promotes ethanol blending in petroleum to up to 20%. But the impact of that is also that this policy allows sugarcane juice, sugar beet, of course, broken crops, for example, wheat and rice, which are supposed to be wasted products, to be used as feedstock. But what does it do to agriculture, right? So on one hand, we are, this policy promotes ethanol, which comes from sugarcane. But sugarcane is one of the most water-intensive crop. And the moment this policy feeds in, it has already started incentivizing farmers to move towards sugarcane, whereas a sustainable agricultural policy would mean that we need to move away from sugar. So these are the kind of trade-offs. So on one hand, ethanol is blending is good for the energy policy, but it's terribly complicated and impacts the agricultural emissions and the water specifically. So that distorts the agriculture sector completely. So we take all of these, we look at biodiversity, we look at what are the ideal combinations of nitrogen. How do we, nitrogen again is a very important, very interesting case where there is a tremendous subsidy given for urea, which is the most nitrogen intensive fertilizer. And there is not so much subsidy. So for example, other fertilizers which are less nitrogen intensive are very expensive, but the most nitrogen intensive is extremely cheap. So that gets overused. Now, how do you solve for that? We are trying to, we're trying to see if we can present results where which help design these policies. Similarly, for waters, there is water use efficiency is what we are trying to focus on this in a scenario in this scenathon, and the policies which are aligned to that, which are per drop, more crop, for example. How do you increase micro irrigation? How do you increase the efficiency of uptake of water, and how can we achieve those policies? How can we help use those policies to achieve these goals? Is what this scenario marathon or scenathon will try to focus on. So just a quick overview of this. Sorry for stepping over the time limit a little bit. Thank you very much. Fabrice, over to you.
Thanks, Ranjan. We'll send you the violation for going over time. It'd be in your mailbox. But no, thanks for that. And there's several questions coming in, Ranjan. If you want to take a look at the Q&A, we'll come back to those in just a bit. But let's move over to Colombia. John, are you ready to go?
Yeah, thank you, Fabrice. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. Today, from the FABLE Colombian team, we want to share a bit about our work, but most importantly, what lies ahead for Colombia in the short time. We have titled this brief talk, Environmental and Territorial Planning, Challenge for Water Food Nexus. I'm John Chavarro, a student at Javeriana University here in Colombia. Let me take a moment to introduce our current FABLE Colombian team. As you can see, Jorge, Ricardo, Andres, Willy, and I are all working together to support the Consortium initiative. We've assembled diverse teams to tackle the several challenges surrounding water, food, and in general, natural resources. As our colleagues in India and Mexico said, we've been creating valuable knowledge to support decision makers on land use in Colombia. Also, our work centers on mathematical modeling, including explicit spatial EP models like Lovayon, and of course, the FABLE Calculator. Some about our publication in 2019 and 2020, the Global Consortium reports. Also, our most recent work, a policy brief released in English version 2 weeks ago and Spanish version last week, is particularly noteworthy. This policy brief explored the relationships between ecological restoration and food production, discussing how we can achieve different goals using existing tools, but also how we could go a step further. Please feel free to check out this documentation available in our webpage. And I want to highlight 3 topics in this speech that we consider essential for our work. First, the new National Development Plan for Colombia, recently approved by the Congress. This is the roadmap for this government. This plan seeks to lay the foundation for the country's development in the short term, actually between 2023, 2026, sorry. This roadmap for Colombia places great emphasis on how we interact with the environment and scientifically supported productive transformations. To achieve this, a great effort will be made on issues related to territorial planning with a focus on water. Indeed, the ambitious roadmap is based on 5 great transformations, but for today, I will only refer to one of them, that is ordering the territory around water. But what does it mean? Well, what has been mentioned in this regard is that it is an action to guarantee the sustainability for our economic model. It is then sought to implement the water cycle in the different planning instruments effectively. This doesn't mean that in the past, water resources were not one of the fundamental elements in the territorial planning. So the focus on this occasion is on the comprehensiveness of policies in the process of economic transition. The economic transition process is an issue that I see with many uncertainties for our context. However, the position on a comprehensive view is a positive signal and timely in the framework of what we discussed today. In this way, it is necessary to implement frameworks in order to articulate the different economic sector with a common language, water. So we need to reconcile water for ecosystems so that they function and provide their services. But also, we need water to supply human consumption. Also, we need water for food production. Basically, our production system is rainfed. Around 90% of it is in that way. Only 10% is irrigated. According to official figures, we need to grow by about 17 million hectares. And also we need water to produce energy. 70% of the country's electricity or power is produced by water, hydropower. So the second one is about the territorial planning. The territorial planning process in Colombia is very complicated. We have great challenge in this matter. Around 49 entities intervene in this process and more than 70 instruments from different sectors, multiple scales, and so on. We have a policy for water resources, for the management of biodiversity, for productive planning, for energy transition, a national restoration plan, and so on. But in reality, they are independent instruments, which finally the regional and the local decision makers must articulate and harmonize to carry out the planning of their territory. So in this way, there is a very interesting opportunity through the Nexus approach to provide decision makers with relevant information for land use planning in a comprehensive approach that includes water as the core. And what does mean? Well, it is to understand what happened when aspects that are already in the policies, or maybe not, are implemented and provide alternatives or actions to maximize those synergies and minimize losses. So it includes evaluating policies for us derived from the 2016 peace agreement, such as the agricultural frontier, which established an area of 14 million hectares suitable for agricultural development. But at the same time, if we achieve productive ordering for the agricultural sector, that is, we could produce rice where it is more profitable to produce rice, and in the same way, sugarcane, coffee, oil palm, milk, meat, and so on. And then it's arise some question. For instance, would the objectives of the water resources policy be achieved in terms of, for instance, efficiency in water use? What about the water quality? What about climate? Colombia is a country that is highly affected by the macroclimatic phenomena. In 2010-2011, a very humid period in Colombia, La Niña, affected the GDP by 2 points. And also the El Niño phenomena, that is a dry season, GDP is also affected by 0.5 points. That's happened in 2015 and 2011. And in the middle, do we have enough to reach international agreements? For instance, NDC, 50% GHG reduction by 2030 and zero by 2050. And how about a global biodiversity framework, conservation and restoration goals, etc. And we haven't even gotten talk about climate change adaptations. Well, there are some of our challenges and opportunities at the same time, and we want to be part of this process. The third one, it's what we have considered in the short term for our country. Well, our colleagues in India and Mexico already anticipated. We will also participating in the FABLE Consortium Global Marathon, Scenathon 2023. Scenathon 2023 is based on 3 pathways. These 3 pathways fit us very well in the current context, particularly with the second pathway, sorry, compared to the current government's goals. And we want to build these pathways together with the decision makers. We have already agreed with the Ministry of Environment to carry out this construction through workshops with the stakeholder and decision makers within the framework of the Regional Environmental Councils of Macrobasin, CARMAC. There are 5 in total in Colombia. And ministries such as agriculture, health, mines and energy, and regional environmental authorities and regional and local territorial authorities participate in these councils. Also, we are working with the Stockholm Environmental Institute, SDSN, and the Ministry of Environment to structure and submit next month a project for the integral evaluation of water resources in the Sino River Basin. That's in the north of Colombia, in the Caribbean macro basin. This project aims to provide technical elements to the regional and local authorities for the environmental territorial ordering in the basin. And what about in the medium term, 2024, 2026? At the end of the year, we must adjust the roadmap with the Ministry of the Environment. And we want to involve the Ministry of Health more effectively in this exercise, considering that diets are important protagonists in this story. And finally, a key point during 2024 will be the updating of the water resource policy. Of course, we want to provide all our knowledge so that the water and its policy are in harmony with food production, agricultural development, hydroenergy, and biofuels, with the policies and goals of conservation, restoration of ecosystem, and biodiversity. That is all. Thank you very much for this space.
Thank you very much, John. That was a fantastic. So we have a tour of the 3 countries. I see quite a few questions that have been brought into the Q&A session. Many of them have been answered, but I think we have an opportunity to discuss some of them. There's a couple points that I think I want to emphasize in this, and one is the multiple types of nexuses that the FABLE Consortium is trying to address, and that we're able to do because we have a country, national to global type of approach. One is downscaling of global goals. So already that allows us to better understand what each country's capacity and responsibility is to the different goals. Second, in the 3 scenarios that you heard Aline and the country speak to, business as usual, what is the current trajectory that countries are on? 2, national commitment. What commitments have countries made, either through the climate process, the biodiversity process, the food system pathways, or national food-based dietary guidelines? And then three, using the results of both business as usual and national priorities, a stakeholder-driven scenario that is the result of an evidence-based dialogue using the frameworks to allow policymakers and stakeholders to assess whether their ambition is greater than business as usual, if needed, and how far that ambition is from these global goals. So those are, I think, critical trade-offs. The other nexus element is the one across the thematics, right? So it's the capacity to look at how do you provide a healthy diet to your national population? What does this mean in terms of the need to use water, land, energy, and resources to produce that food? What's the role in trade and making fill that gap? And understanding and elevating those trade-offs, again, have been a critical part of, again, being able to identify critical trade-off issues or even opportunities and synergies. The second main point that I want to make is that this changes a bit, at least the way some of us are doing science, right? It's often knowledge and then action, into really trying to create interaction. We can have both science and act at the same time. And that is recognizing the critical role of research, not in providing what are the critical solutions for a country to take, but being able to work with countries to assess what are the impacts of current solutions and to explore solutions that might be proposed by a diversity of stakeholders within those countries, which range from agroecology to financial incentives to taxes and others. So that's the ambition with the FABLE network. We'd invite you to explore the FABLE Consortium website and also would invite any of you, if you are in a country that has modeling capacity, you're not on part of the list, or you want to collaborate with one of our country teams, do let Aline and the members know, and we'd be happy to reach out to you. I have one open question. The open question is a comment by Claudia. That is enthusiastic. Let's do something together. I do have a question from Emile Frisson for you, Ranjan, on assessing the capacity of agroecology to reach some of these potentials. Do you want to address that one?
Can you please repeat the question, because I don't see that written somewhere? So
sure. Let me quickly scan down to it. Aline provided an answer, so we can let Aline answer. But I think it'd be great for any of the other country teams to mention as well. Emile's question was, why is the evidence of the potential of agroecology, natural farming, with a 10 to 20% productivity increase and a 50% increase in net income not taken on board in the study? So it's a question about how you're onboarding some of the agroecology. Aline, do you want to tackle that first while we let Ranjan mull?
Yeah, I think sorry,
Aline,
go ahead.
Yeah, should go for that. No, I think Aline should go for it.
Okay, no, it's just to say that it's a timely question because we are just about to look at our first results with some agroecological practices and the impact on that on our multiple objectives. So it is based on a meta-analysis led by Sarah Jones at the Alliance. So we are really looking forward. I think that now we have a set of 7 practices, agroecological practices that we could represent. But of course, like to make the connections of these practices with all our other indicators. So we make the first connection with productivity, but then of course, there are a lot more indicators that should be connected to that. And I think that also to collect more in-country data, specific country context-specific data will be quite nice. But now that it is in the model, I think it will open really nice discussions also with stakeholders in all our countries. So I'm hopeful that we'll get there.
Great, thanks. Ranjan, do you want to jump in?
But I will, I think Aline has already answered on the modeling part. I'll just quickly touch upon the complexities of understanding agroecology in a setting like ours. Is that there are also, there are a lot of measurement issues and definitional issues currently of how do we understand agroecology. So in the policy discussions, like I was in the Ministry of Agriculture just a few weeks back, and we had a discussion on agroecology. But what do we really mean and understand by that is also in a policy discourse in the making. So there are curated agroecologies, there are natural agroecologies. So there are problems and complexities in terms of collecting the data, understanding and defining that, and that's I think a challenge which we are trying to we will have to take on board as we introduce the agroecology components in our modeling framework, which is extremely important and interesting.
Great, thanks, Ranjan. John and Charlotte, can you speak to any critical trade-offs that the work that you've done both in the scenathon or in your engagement with stakeholders has elevated, and how maybe the models have helped you try to address or resolve those?
Yeah, Faris. So one of the trades that we covered during the last policy brief was the trade between restoration and conservation objectives and food production. And that was interesting because the results shows us that it is possible to achieve 1.3 million hectares on passive restoration at the same time that we not impact negative the food production in Colombia, especially the livestock sector, the meat and milk production. So that kind of trade-off that frequently the people say that it's impossible include. So the model showed that it is a way to cover these two maybe different dimensions and achieve the objective at the same time. That's it's possible. That was great. I think it's a remarkable result from our policy brief.
Fantastic. So that there are synergies as well. Charlotte, how about you?
Well, one that is strikes the most when we talk with the stakeholders is what happens if we try to be self-sufficient in all the food. Mainly, what will happen if we try to produce all the maize that is necessary to feed the population, the human population, but also all the maize that is needed to feed animal population. So what we have worked in the calculator is to try to see what will happen if we focus on producing, if Mexico focuses on producing the maize that will be eaten by humans, and we import the maize that will be used to feed animals. And then it comes out really nicely. However, this is not something that is seen with good eyes in Mexico, because there is a lot of insistence on being self-sufficient in all corn. It doesn't matter for what purpose it is. But if we do that, then it's very difficult to find areas. I mean, the agricultural frontier will expand much more. So what we propose is to see imports in maize specifically as a way of lowering the burden on our environmental systems and our production systems, but also keeping our self-sufficiency for the kind of maize that we eat. I mean, Mexicans like to eat maize, and there needs to be a very specific type of maize that needs to be palatable, and there are varieties. And if we focus on that, we have a gain. However, this needs to be further discussed with stakeholders because they don't like the idea.
Fantastic. Thank you, Charlotte. So I think, the points you both raised is that by being able to use these evidence-based modeling approaches, we're able to elevate and understand where the potential conflict zones are, explore potential solutions, and even identify where there are synergies, both at the national scale and at the global scale. And I realize, Aline, that the trade negotiation at the end becomes a critical piece there that we're still working on. We're at time, but I really want to thank everyone who's joined us for this past hour. I want to thank Maria Diaz, who helped to organize this, along with Kathy Jacobs and our friends at Scriptoria. If you are interested in FABLE Consortium, please do take a look at the website. Feel free to contact us, and we'd be keen to have a conversation with you. Thanks again also to Charlotte, Aline, John, and Ranjan for your presentations, and wishing all of you a very good rest of your day.